Alright, so let's talk about Avengers Age of Ultron. Now, comparatively to the first film, I feel like this is very similar, in my opinion, to Guardians of the Galaxy 1 to Guardians of the Galaxy 2, in which Age of Ultron is still a really, really great sequel. I feel like some of the humor in this and Guardians 2 was a little forced, and that's the only reason why I don't think this is just almost as good as the first one. That's my only real complaint. I think that the humor in this, for the most part, is great, but there are a couple times where I'm like, don't emotionally ruin it with the humor, like Guardians 2 did as well. But besides the fact, there are only a few tiny moments, a few tiny jokes. They're not anything that really pisses me off. It's just like, okay, you could have done a little different for me personally. But overall, Avengers Age of Ultron is a really cool sequel. I really like the idea of how these characters join again, and I like how it took the first movie, it took them the whole movie to become like teammates, and I like that. I love that idea about the first one where they tried. It took them so much through all these tasks to become literal Avengers for somebody, and I think that in this movie, it's cool that you see them now in action, already learning or already learned what they needed to learn in the first movie. I like that these characters are already friends. I like their new demeanors towards each other. I like their personalities still. I think that they're all interesting. I think that they're all fun. I think that some of these characters get more development than they did in the first one, and that's cool because they do kind of a switcheroo thing where, like, say you get more about Tony Stark in the first one, and in this one you get more about Bruce Banner and Natasha Romanoff, and I like the idea of showing, like, switching around in each one, and that's not an insult to either one of these movies, but I like how they keep, and in any of the Marvel films, I like that all these Marvel films, if they have sequels or have characters in other movies, they kind of evolve them in different ways through different movies. They don't have to always evolve them in one of them each time. It's like they do it gracefully through every movie. I think that that's cool. And I thought that the relationship with Bruce Banner and Natasha Romanoff was really cool, because I really loved, in The Incredible Hulk, I loved the Bruce Banner and Betty Ross romance. Like, I'm not really a romance person, but I thought their romance was incredible and just heartbreaking. And in this one, it's really good too, even though I love the Betty Ross one more. But this is cool how they evolved Bruce Banner and how he is so, like, you see more of why he can't literally, like, he can't become anything more than this monster that's inside of him. And I love the idea of how he and Natasha Romanoff, and she calls herself a monster too, in a way because of how she was trained. She was sterilized, and it's horrible that, like, that's what they have to do at the graduation day. At the end of learning to be an assassin, they have to be sterilized. But I like the line where she says, "You're not the only monster on this team, are you?" I like that, because even though that's a touchy subject, I like the idea of showing them both have a little connection to each other and why they kind of fell for each other. And it really is just interesting, and I think that they really were effective together. I thought that they really had a good, like, charisma together. And I thought that Tony Stark was as always really good. He's the one that initiates this whole movie, where he sees, whenever Scarlet Witch shows him this vision where he sees everybody dying, and then all the Chitauri are going to Earth again, he creates Ultron, which makes it worse, but he creates Ultron because of this fear that he's going to have. And I like that explanation about how he is scared to see what the world is going to be if he doesn't get better with himself, because this character does quick impulses. He's not one to think about it. He's one that just does whatever he wants. And I like how this character keeps evolving throughout all these movies, and it's really cool how in this one he is learning more about what he shouldn't do. I think that's cool. And I like how Captain America, he is kind of like in the other movies where he's still torn on what to do with everybody else, because he is so into a different time before, where it's so different now than what it was. And I like the idea of him still feeling that way towards everybody, and how it didn't end up in a fight, but I like the idea of how you can tell the difference between him and everybody else. I thought he was cool, and I thought Thor was cool too. Thor's the one his arc, I guess, is the one with the Infinity Stones, which I thought was fine, but he didn't really have much else, which is fine too. But overall, like, Thor's good, but he's probably he's the one that has the least story in this movie, besides the fact that he goes through the Infinity Stones, which is fine, but like, he's still a cool character, but he has the least, I think, out of all the characters. And I really thought that Hawkeye, who in the first movie was in the movie a lot, like he was great in the first movie too, but in this one he really gets more developed. I like that we see his family. I like that we see him we see more of his home life, and he becomes such a, even though he's in the likable character in the first movie, he becomes incredibly more likable in this one. And I think that showing him have a family is really great, because it works to that end scene where, before he almost dies, before Quicksilver sacrifices himself, that moment where he's about to get shot down, it works so effectively because you saw his relationship with his family, you saw all the stuff that has been in this movie. It works so well to build up to that almost death, where you were like, okay, he's got a family at home, he's got somebody now to live, like, you know, that he's living for. Like, losing him is going to be the worst thing ever. And I think that he was really good in this movie, like he was in the first one, and he was evolved more. I think that's cool whenever they do that. They evolve these characters. And I just really liked his character too in this movie. And I thought that Ultron was a cool villain. Usually the villains ranged from being bland to good. Like, Loki's great. Up to this point, Loki's the best one still, I guess. Even though there are a couple others I like. But up to this point, it was just Loki pretty much was the one that kind of stole the show for mostly the other movies. And I think he's a better villain than Ultron. But Ultron is still cool, and I love the idea that he is Tony Stark's id, where he is literally just created from Tony Stark, and his personality and how he reacts to stuff is his personality. Like, it's literally Tony Stark's kid. I think that that's really cool, and I think that's fun, and the humor is funny too. It doesn't overstay its welcome with how Ultron says humorous things, but it makes sense in his character because it's similar to Tony Stark and how he's acting. I think that that's cool. And I thought James Spader was a great choice for Ultron. That was a cool, intimidating voice. James Spader is awesome. And I thought he did a good job as well. And the story is pretty, like, I feel like out of the two Avengers movies so far, this one was the weaker story because it was trying to be literally just robot take over the world thing. And in Avengers, I like the idea of building them all together, having them fight enough to where they have to learn their differences and become heroes after losing somebody and avenging. And in this movie, they already are Avengers, and they just have to fight another version of Tony Stark, basically. Which is fine. I think it's a fine story. It's just, I think, the weaker out of the two, because I really like Loki more, and I like the idea of the Avengers having to form a bond and build together. And in this one, you've already seen that, which is fine, but I think that the first one, I think, is still a little better because of that, and because of a couple jokes in this that were a little forced to me. But overall, Avengers 2 is still really great. The action's great, the characters are great, the story's great. Overall, it's still a really great sequel. It's just a tad under the first one. Not by much, but I think it's still a pretty damn good sequel.